Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. What would you do if an HOA fined you for fishing on your own dock, then showed up and padlocked it like they owned the place? I thought it was a mistake until my lawyer pulled one map that flipped the entire lake upside down. So who was trespassing? Me or them? The trouble started about a year ago. I was sitting on my dock on a Saturday morning fishing like I'd done hundreds of times before. The sun had just cleared the tree line and the lake was smooth as glass. I had my coffee in one hand and my rod in the other, watching the bobber drift lazily near the lily pads. This was my routine most weekends when the weather was decent. Had been for years. Then I heard a voice calling from the shore behind me. "Excuse me." "Excuse me, sir." I turned to see a woman in yoga pants and a visor power walking down the path that ran along my property line. She was waving at me like I was 100 yards away instead of 30 feet. I reeled in my line and walked back down the dock to meet her. "Can I help you?" She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, I'm Jennifer Holbrook, president of the Lakeview Estates HOA. She gestured behind her toward the development on the far side of the lake. "I wanted to introduce myself and welcome you to the community." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I'm not part of the community. My family has owned this property for over 50 years. Her smile tightened. "Oh, I understand there's some historical ownership here. But now that Lakeview Estates has been established, we've implemented some community guidelines to keep the lake safe and enjoyable for everyone. I wanted to make sure you're aware of them." I waited. She pulled out a folded pamphlet from her fanny pack. "We have fishing regulations now, catch and release only, barbless hooks, and fishing is only permitted during designated hours, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. We also require all fishermen to register with the HOA office and pay a small annual fee, just $25 to help maintain the lake." I took the pamphlet but didn't open it. "This is my property. I'm not part of your HOA. The lake is a shared community resource," she said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "We all need to be good neighbors and follow the same rules." "I am being a good neighbor," I said. "I keep to my own property and don't bother anyone." Her face flushed slightly. "Well, we'll see what our legal counsel has to say about that. I'd really encourage you to be a team player here." She turned and walked back up the path before I could respond. I should explain the layout. My grandfather bought this land back when this area was nothing but woods and farmland. He built a small cabin on the property along with a dock that extended into the lake. When he died, the property passed to my father, and when Dad died 3 years ago, it came to me. The cabin isn't much, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a living room, but it's been in our family for decades. I live in town during the week and come out here on weekends. About 4 years ago, a developer bought up a large parcel of land on the opposite side of the lake and built Lakeview Estates, a planned community with about 60 houses, a clubhouse, and their own private beach area on their side of the water. I didn't pay much attention to it. The lake was big enough for all of us, and I figured we'd just coexist. That assumption turned out to be wrong. The following week, I received a letter in the mail from the HOA. It was a formal notice informing me that I had violated community fishing regulations and owed a fine of $200. The letter cited the pamphlet Jennifer had given me and stated that I'd been observed fishing outside designated hours and without proper registration. I called the number on the letterhead and got a voicemail. I left a message explaining that I wasn't part of the HOA and wouldn't be paying any fine. I thought that would be the end of it. Instead, I received another letter 2 weeks later. This one informed me that my fine had increased to $300 due to non-payment, and that continued violations would result in further action. That's when I decided to call a lawyer. His name was Tom Brennan, and he'd handled my father's estate. I explained the situation, and he asked me to send him copies of all the documents I had, the deed to my property, the survey from when my grandfather bought the land, and the letters from the HOA. "Give me a few days to look into this," he said. "Don't pay anything, and don't sign anything they send you." I followed his advice and ignored the next 2 letters from the HOA. Each one threatened more severe consequences. The 4th letter mentioned potential legal action. Then things escalated. I drove out to the cabin one Friday afternoon and found a chain wrapped around my dock with a padlock securing it to one of the posts. A piece of paper in a plastic sleeve hung from the chain with a printed notice. "Dock closed pending safety inspection and permit review by order of Lakeview Estates HOA." I stood there staring at it, feeling my blood pressure rise. This was my property, my dock. My grandfather had built it with his own hands 40 years ago. I called Tom immediately. "They did what?" he said. I explained about the chain and the notice. "Don't cut it yet," he said. "Take photos of everything, the chain, the notice, all of it. Send them to me. I'm going to file for an emergency court order. This is trespassing and property damage." I spent that weekend at a hotel in town, too angry to enjoy the cabin. Tom worked fast. He reviewed everything and had me confirm a few details. "You're certain your property line extends into the water?" I told him I'd always assumed it did, but I'd never had it surveyed formally since my grandfather's time. He pulled up the county GIS system and the original deed documents, then started grinning. "Your grandfather bought riparian rights. Your property line extends 15 feet into the lake from the mean high water mark. Even better," he traced his finger along the map, "you own approximately 200 feet of shoreline extending in both directions from your dock." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "It means the entire shoreline on your side of the lake for about 200 feet in each direction from your dock belongs to you. The lake itself is a private body of water shared between riparian owners, your property, and the HOA development, which means while HOA residents can use the water, they have no right to access it from your shoreline, dock, or lake bed without permission. Every kayak tied to my dock, every person standing on my beach, they're trespassing on my property to access the water." He let that sink in. "They've been using your beach?" "All summer," I said. "I figured it was community property or something." "It's not, it's yours, and they just locked you out of your own dock." He was grinning now. "This is going to be fun." Within 3 days, we had a court order explicitly stating the HOA had no authority over my dock. I went to the property with the court order in hand and bolt cutters from my truck. I cut the chain off myself and kept it as evidence. My lawyer had the deputy serve the court order on the HOA president afterward, which explicitly stated that any further interference would result in contempt of court charges. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The next weekend, I found Jennifer and 2 other HOA board members waiting for me at the cabin. They'd parked their car at the end of my driveway and walked down to intercept me. "We need to talk," Jennifer said. Her smile was gone now. "I have nothing to say to you," I replied, walking past them toward the cabin. "We could take this to court," one of the men said. He was tall, wearing golf clothes and wraparound sunglasses. "Our lawyer says we have a case for shared lake access." I stopped and turned around. "Your lawyer is wrong. My lawyer has already confirmed that my family owns the shoreline and the lake bed on this side of the lake. You have no legal claim to my dock, my shoreline, or anything else on my property." "The lake is a community resource," Jennifer insisted. "You can't just claim ownership." "I'm not claiming it, I'm stating a fact. My grandfather bought this land and the water rights more than 50 years ago. It's all documented with the county. If you want to argue about it, take it up with a judge. Now get off my property." They left, but I could tell this wasn't over. 2 weeks later, Tom called me. "The HOA's lawyer contacted me. They want to meet." "What for?" "They're hoping to negotiate. I think they've finally realized they don't have a case, but they don't want to admit defeat. Let's hear what they have to say." We met at a conference room in the local library, a neutral location halfway between my place and the development. Jennifer was there with 2 other board members and their lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 50s who seemed like he already knew this was a losing battle. Jennifer started with pleasantries, trying to reset the tone. "We want to work together as neighbors." "Let's skip the preamble," Tom interrupted. "You locked my client out of his own dock, sent him harassing letters with bogus fines, and trespassed on his property. We're here because you finally checked the property records and realized you have no legal standing. What's your proposal?" The HOA's lawyer cleared his throat. "We'd like to request an easement for lake access from your client's shoreline. We're prepared to discuss terms." "No," I said. Jennifer's face went red. "We're trying to be reasonable." "You should have been reasonable before you chained up my dock," I said. "You should have been reasonable before you sent me threatening letters and fines for fishing on my own property. You want access to my shoreline? You should have asked nicely a year ago." "We're asking now," the other board member said. "And I'm saying no." Tom was watching me carefully. I could tell he was enjoying this. Jennifer tried a different approach. "What if we dropped all the fines and apologized? Fresh start." "You don't have any fines to drop," Tom said. "Those were never legitimate to begin with." She offered to drop all the fines if I would agree to follow their fishing guidelines voluntarily, I said, looking at Jennifer. I paused, then said I'd be happy to follow their fishing guidelines. Their lawyer looked relieved. Tom hid a smile because he knew what was coming. I pulled out a copy of their own rules and read aloud. All fishing must be conducted from HOA-designated fishing areas only. I looked up. Since my dock is an HOA property, it's not a designated fishing area under your rules. So to comply with your fishing guidelines, I'll need to fish from somewhere within HOA boundaries. Their faces fell as they realized what I was saying. I assume you'll grant me access to your designated fishing spots so I can follow your rules? Jennifer's face went red. She withdrew the request immediately, muttering something about reconsidering their approach. The meeting ended badly. As we walked out, Tom was laughing. That was beautiful. Did you plan that? Came to me in the moment, I said. Well, they're going to regroup and come back with something else. Be ready. He was right. A month later, I received a formal letter, not from the HOA, but from their lawyer. It was a cease and desist, demanding that I stop interfering with community members' lawful use of the lake. Tom read it and shook his head. They're desperate. This doesn't have any legal weight. They're trying to intimidate you. What do? We respond, firmly. Tom drafted a response that laid out in excruciating legal detail exactly why the HOA had no claim to my property. He included copies of the deed, the survey maps, and the county records showing riparian rights. He also included a bill for his time and a demand that the HOA cease all contact with me unless it was through proper legal channels. That seemed to quiet things down for a while. Summer turned to fall, and I spent my weekends at the cabin without incident. I fished when I wanted, where I wanted, and nobody bothered me. But I started noticing something else. HOA residents were still using my beach. I'd see them in the early mornings or late afternoons, people with kayaks, paddle boards, kids playing in the shallow water. They were treating the shoreline on my side of the lake like it was public property. I mentioned it to Tom. You have every right to stop them, he said. It's your property. You want me to send another letter? Let me think about it. I spent the next few weekends observing. There were easily a dozen different families using my shoreline regularly. They'd park their cars near the walking path that bordered my property and carry their gear down to the water. Some of them had even set up a makeshift volleyball net in the sand. It bothered me, but I wasn't sure I wanted to be the bad guy who kicked families off the beach. Then again, it was my property, and they'd never asked permission. Jennifer certainly hadn't asked nicely after everything that had happened. I decided to do something about it. Tom helped me draft a notice. It was polite but firm. This shoreline is private property. Trespassing is prohibited. Please use HOA beach access on the opposite shore. I printed 20 copies, laminated them, and mounted them on stakes every 10 feet along the shoreline. Then I called the HOA office and left a message informing them that I was enforcing my property rights and that any further trespassing would result in legal action. The response was immediate. Jennifer called me directly. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. That's my property. Families have been using that beach all summer, without permission, on my land. This is ridiculous. You're being petty. You chained up my dock and tried to find me for fishing on my own property. You tell me who's being petty. She hung up. The next weekend, someone tore down all my signs. I found them in a pile near the tree line. I put them back up and added a camera, a trail cam I used for hunting, mounted to a tree with a view of the shoreline. 2 days later, the camera caught Jennifer herself pulling up signs. She was with another woman, and they were laughing as they tossed the signs into the woods. I sent the video to Tom. Oh, this is good, he said. This is very good. She's destroying your property and trespassing. We can add this to everything else. What do you mean, everything else? I've been keeping a file. All the letters, the photos of the chain on your dock, the bogus fines. If we need to, we can file a harassment suit, but I think we have a better option now. What's that? We go nuclear. We install a rope barrier along your property line in the water. Buoys, markers, the whole thing. We make it physically impossible for HOA residents to access your shoreline without obviously trespassing. And we send them a formal letter explaining that any further violation will result in legal action, not just against the individuals, but against the HOA itself for encouraging trespassing. I like the sound of that. It took a week to get everything set up. I hired a marine contractor to install the buoys and rope barrier. It ran the entire length of my shoreline, about 200 feet in each direction from the dock, clearly marking where my property ended and the lake began. Each buoy had a small laminated sign. Private property, no trespassing. Tom sent the letter the same day the barrier went up. It was addressed to the HOA board and copied to their lawyer. It outlined everything that had happened over the past year, included documentation of all the trespassing and property damage, and stated clearly that any further violations would result in a lawsuit for harassment, trespassing, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The best part came 2 weeks later. The HOA had a rule that all watercraft must be registered with the HOA office and display a current sticker. I'd seen this rule enforced. They'd even fined residents for having guests with unregistered kayaks. So when I noticed HOA residents repeatedly crossing my boundary line with their boats, I started documenting every violation. I sent the HOA a formal complaint citing their own rules: unregistered watercraft trespassing on private property. I included photos of a dozen different violators with their HOA registration stickers clearly visible. I demanded they enforce their own rules and fine each violator $200, the same amount they'd tried to fine me. The acting president called immediately, flustered, trying to explain these were different circumstances. I told him I was just trying to be a good neighbor by helping them enforce their community standards. He got the message. The trespassing stopped overnight. The response from the community was mixed. Some residents complained on social media about the unfriendly neighbor who'd closed off the beach. Others pointed out that I was just protecting my own property. A few residents actually reached out to apologize, saying they hadn't realized the shoreline was privately owned. Jennifer was silent for a while. Then, about a month later, I heard through the grapevine that there was going to be an emergency HOA meeting. Tom got wind of it too. Apparently, a group of residents had called for Jennifer's removal as president. They're blaming her for the legal bills, Tom explained. The HOA has spent over $15,000 on lawyer fees fighting you, and they have nothing to show for it. Some residents are pretty angry. Good, I said. The meeting happened on a Tuesday night. I didn't attend. It was for HOA members only, but I heard about the results the next day. Jennifer had been removed as president. The board voted to replace her with someone who promised a more collaborative approach to community relations. The new president called me the following week. His name was David, and he sounded genuinely apologetic. "I want to start over," he said. "What happened between you and Jennifer was unfortunate. I'd like to find a way forward that works for everyone." "I'm listening," I said. "Would you be willing to grant an easement for lake access across your shoreline?" "We'd be willing to pay an annual fee." "How much?" "We were thinking $500 per year." I almost laughed. $500 to let 60 families use my beach? No. What would you consider fair? I thought about it. I didn't really want dozens of strangers on my property every weekend, but I also wasn't opposed to a reasonable arrangement if they were willing to actually treat it like a business transaction. $5,000 per year, I said, paid in advance every January. And I wanted in writing that the HOA acknowledges my ownership of the shoreline and dock, and that you'll be responsible for any damage or liability that occurs on my property during the easement period. I also want the right to revoke the easement with 60 days' notice if there are any problems. There was a long pause. "I'll need to discuss this with the board." "Take your time." He called back 3 days later. "We'll accept your terms." Tom drew up the agreement. It was thorough. 10 pages of legal language that protected me from every angle. The HOA would pay me $5,000 per year for limited access to the shoreline. They would carry liability insurance naming me as an additional insured. They would be responsible for maintaining the area, cleaning up after their residents, and making sure nobody interfered with my dock or my private use of the property. Most importantly, I could terminate the agreement with 60 days' notice if they violated the terms. I signed it. So did David and the HOA board. The first payment hit my account in early January. I used part of it to upgrade the dock with new decking, better lighting, and a covered storage area for my fishing gear. The rest went into savings. Jennifer moved away a few months later. From what I heard, the legal bills and the backlash from residents made her position in the community impossible. The HOA had spent over $15,000 fighting a dispute any competent lawyer should have told them they were going to lose. After that, residents demanded financial oversight rules, and the board had to send a formal letter explaining what had happened. My annual easement fee has been paid on time ever since. These days I fish whenever I want. Early mornings, late evenings, weekends, holidays, my dock is mine, my shoreline is mine. The HOA gets limited access because they pay for it, in writing, under terms that protect me. And honestly, most of the residents are fine now. They use the beach, clean up after themselves, and stay away from my dock. That is all I ever would have asked for if they had approached me like neighbors instead of trying to act like they owned the place. Last weekend, David saw me on the dock and waved from his kayak. "Beautiful morning," he called out. "Sure is," I said. He paddled closer. "I wanted to thank you again for working with us on the easement. It's been good for the community." I nodded. "And I wanted to apologize again, on behalf of the board," he said. "That should never have happened." "I appreciate that." He paddled away and I went back to my fishing. The bobber drifted near the lily pads. The sun was warm on my shoulders. The coffee was still hot in my cup. It was a good morning. Just like old times, the next one is a malicious compliance story. I mainly drove central and eastern PA, southern New York, New Jersey, Delaware, northeast Maryland, and sometimes eastern Ohio and southern Connecticut and Virginia. Unfortunately, that region puts me in several cities: Philadelphia, Wilmington, New York, Richmond, and Baltimore, as well as slightly smaller cities like Harrisburg, Trenton, Dover, Newark, and everything in between. The thing to realize as a driver in the city is people hate or don't care about trucks. In their mind, we are just a large, slow-moving annoyance and something to get around so they can get their latte and go about their day. They don't realize the danger of cutting off trucks or stopping short in front of one at speed, or that I can't always see you while driving or backing. So, as a truck driver, you are always on alert for danger. Initially, I hated driving in the cities, but eventually got used to it. I would be backing up slowly to enter or exit an ally, and people would pull up and park directly behind me, or walk directly behind the truck. You learn to judge each situation on a case-by-case basis. Usually your best case scenario, to keep going slow till you are 100% sure you're gonna hit something, then stop if absolutely necessary. Case in point, I'm loaded with roofing materials for a commercial roofing job. I am driving our largest truck in the fleet, a twin-stick Mack with a 42-foot boom crane. This thing was big. It had wide flotation tires on the front axle. If you don't know what they are, they generally are twice the width and diameter of regular truck tires and tend to float on a dirt surface rather than sink in like a normal tire would due to the extra large footprint. The upside is they were able to support much more weight without sinking in the ground. The downside is turning radius. This truck was 20 feet shorter than an 18-wheeler with a 53-foot trailer, but had the same turning radius. So, this one day in 1997, I am headed to a delivery just outside of Phila, Upper Darby to be exact. I'm at a high-traffic signaled intersection traveling south, and I have to turn right to head east. Each corner had 2 straight-through right turn lanes, one in each direction, and dedicated left turn lane, signaled. As normal, I approach the red light, stopping about 50 feet short of the light. Once the left turn lane clears, I can then swing left before turning right. This is the proper way to make a turn of this nature. A lot of times I see trucks turn right from the left turn lane, and that is illegal, and wrong because it allows traffic to come up on your right side. The proper way is to approach in the right lane, swing wide left when clear, then turn right. However, I notice as I am waiting for the lights to do their thing and my opportunity to make my turn. This lady pulls well over the white line of the left turn lane on the east side of the intersection, so as traffic clears and I make the turn, I cannot complete it because she is too far forward in her lane. So, I have to stop mid-turn, for those unaware. At major intersections, there is a thick white line painted across the intersection defining where you are supposed to stop if the light is red. This allows trucks and emergency equipment to make the turn as needed. This helps keep traffic flowing. Now back to the story. I signal to the lady to back up so I can complete the turn, and she signals back no. She is the only car there, no one behind her. I signal again and she furiously signals no, malicious compliance initiated. I put the truck in neutral, set the brakes, shut the engine off, and just sit there. Traffic in the north and southbound lanes are squeezing behind the truck. Eastbound can only turn right, and no other traffic can move. She can't move. I can't move. I'm paid by the hour. She is not. A few light cycles go by and traffic is completely jammed. Of course, the police were called. I could tell by the cop's demeanor that it was reported that a truck was blocking the intersection, because the first thing he did when he got there was to order me to back up. Here's the rub. As a truck driver, if I back up and hit anything, I am liable no matter the circumstance, even with someone guiding me. Hence, a police officer cannot legally tell me to back up. So I tell him no. He then tucks tail and orders the lady to back up, and she argues with the cop. I could not hear what was said, but I imagine the word ticket was involved. which she qualified for disobeying traffic control devices. Finally, she backs up as I start up the truck again and complete my turn in the allotted space. I never saw her or the cop again and laughed for a few miles as I headed to the job. I don't know if she ever got a ticket, but just another day driving a truck that made me smile. The next one is an entitled people story. I work with college students. Most of my day-to-day work is on campus, but occasionally I get opportunities to travel as a chaperone for clubs and student organizations attending conferences. One of these student organizations was attending a conference 2 states away from campus, about an 8-hour drive. I was originally supposed to chaperone the trip with a colleague, but the conference did not announce the dates until about a month beforehand, and my colleague had a wedding that weekend. So it ended up being me and 5 students: the president, vice president, public relations manager, programming manager, and sustainability manager. Most of the students were seniors with a lot of experience in the organization, so I assumed they understood the preparation required for this conference. Because there were so many of us, my boss rented 2 cars for travel, one for me and one for the vice president. I got a Nissan Altima, and the vice president got a Toyota Camry. Unfortunately, the preparation for this conference, and the actual conference itself, showed me that these students had almost no care for the club, the conference, or anything else involved. Just to name a few issues, I asked them to set up a pre-travel meeting before we left campus so we could go over expectations. They agreed multiple times, but never actually scheduled it. They added an hour to our travel time because they kept asking to stop for snacks. They did not complete any pre-conference activities, even though there are usually several small competitions, such as making banners or presenting educational sessions, and I reminded them multiple times. I also asked them to pack old club merchandise to bring to the conference swap shop so we could order new merchandise after returning to campus. They never packed it. At the conference, they showed up late to the opening ceremonies, disappeared halfway through the educational sessions to go buy souvenirs, and were late to the closing ceremonies. They claimed they did not know they were supposed to be somewhere, even though I had sent them a digital schedule. Then, during the closing ceremonies, they complained when other schools won awards because they felt they deserved to win, despite doing no preparation and missing half the conference. This was my first time chaperoning students alone, and I was struggling to keep a handle on them, especially because most of them were juniors or seniors who acted like they knew better than I did. During all of this, I made one request. We were driving back to campus on Sunday. I had weekly plans at 6:30 on Sunday evenings that I wanted to keep. Because we crossed a time zone to get to the conference, and because they had already added an hour to the original travel time with all their extra stops, I asked if we could be ready to leave at 7 in the morning on Sunday. The vice president immediately started whining. "That is so early. Oh my God, can we not do 7:30? I told them this was literally my one ask. They had already made me look foolish by blowing off half the conference. I just needed them to be in the lobby at 7 so I could take them home. They eventually agreed. I sent a text message into the group chat reminding them of our 7 in the morning departure time, then went to bed at my old person bedtime of 9:30. What I did not know was that immediately after I left, the vice president told everyone, "Do not listen to spaghetti shoestrings. We are leaving whenever I want because I have the keys to the Camry." She basically convinced the group to go along with a 7:30 departure time instead. The next morning, I got up and sat in the lobby at 6:50. 7 o'clock came and no one was there. At 7:02, I messaged the group chat to see if they were awake. The programming manager immediately responded, "Be down in a minute." Still, no one showed up. By 7:10, I was annoyed. By 7:15, I was fuming. I sent a message that basically said, "I have been so patient with you all weekend, and I asked for one thing, and you could not even do that. I am leaving at 7:30, not meeting you in the lobby at 7:30, leaving, driving off the lot. Anyone who does not want to cram themselves into the Camry needs to be in the lobby in the next 5 minutes." Wouldn't you know it, suddenly the president, programming manager, and public relations manager were on their way. Even the vice president came down. Where was the sustainability manager? He had gotten into the shower at 7:11. By that point, the president started filling me in on what had happened the night before. She told me that the vice president had said she would text me about the new plans. No one ever texted me. I looked at the vice president and told her that since she had the keys to the Camry and wanted to stay longer so badly, she could drive everyone except the president, along with all of their stuff. They would have to wait for the sustainability manager to finish his shower, and I was leaving immediately. They could catch up and we would meet for lunch at some point. Then I left. Fun fact, the Camry was smaller than the Altima. The students had already been uncomfortable with 3 of them in that car during the drive to the conference, but now they had to fit an additional person because they kept trying to push my limits. Was it the most responsible thing for me to leave 5 students alone in a different state while I was technically supposed to be chaperoning them? Perhaps not, but I did not call anyone to check. I drove off the lot at 7:29 in the morning and I made it to my 6:30 plans that night. I also recruited an entirely new executive board for the following year, and they are much more excited about actually doing their jobs. The next one is an entitled parent story. A few weeks ago, I was on a 6-hour plane ride seated in front of a 3-year-old child. I try to be very patient with kids on planes because I know their parents are usually doing the best they can. They are probably more stressed and panicked about their child misbehaving than I am. That being said, the child behind me was kicking my seat non-stop for hours. It was clearly on purpose, and she was kicking pretty hard. Her mom did keep asking her to stop, so for most of the flight, I leaned forward and tried to let it slide. I have had plenty of bad plane experiences where the parent does not even try, so at this point, even a little effort is appreciated. But as we got into the last hour of the flight, I started getting really annoyed. While I initially appreciated that the mom was asking her child to stop, I was frustrated that it obviously was not working, and she was not doing anything beyond repeating herself. She never took her child for a walk up and down the aisle, never put a hand on her legs to stop her from kicking, and never tried anything else. I was also a little grumpy because I had been trying to sleep. Every time I got close to falling asleep, I would get jolted awake by another hard kick. Finally, during the last hour of the flight, the child started kicking as hard as she could. This time, the mom was not saying anything. So I turned around, not really making eye contact with the child, but facing their general direction so I could be heard, and said in a very nice tone, "Please stop kicking my seat." That was apparently a bad move. The mom completely lost it. She said, "You do not speak to my child, she is 3. I replied as politely as I could, "I understand that, but I did pay for this seat." She cut me off and said, "No, you do not ever speak to my child. I have asked her to stop." I said, "I have heard you, and I really do appreciate that." She said, "She is 3 years old, you speak to me. You do not get to tell my child not to kick your seat." I said, "Please." I was trying to be polite. She just kept repeating that I did not get to speak to her child, and I kept saying, "Okay, I am sorry. I was trying to be polite." Keep in mind, I did not really speak directly to her child. I just said it in their general direction. It was not like I stood up, leaned over the seat, or got in the child's face. Finally, I just turned back around so the interaction would end. I cried a little afterward, honestly. But I was comforted by the fact that I had stayed polite throughout the entire exchange. I also do not think there was anything I could have done that would not have resulted in the mom reacting badly. I'm pretty sure that even if I had asked the mom directly instead of saying it toward the child, I would have received a similar response. Personally, I do not think what I did was wrong. I was patient for more than 5 hours. I made a polite request. And honestly, if your child is old enough to negatively affect another person, then they are old enough to be told to stop by that person, especially if they are refusing to listen to their parent. Gentle parenting can be a good tool, but when it is not working, you need to try something else. It seems like there is a recent trend where some parents refuse to let anyone correct or speak to their children except themselves, and I find that odd. I understand that kids will be kids, but I do not understand why that means I am expected to let someone's child kick my seat for 5 hours without ever asking them to stop. What happens when that child enters school or goes out into the real world? How is a child supposed to learn to accept correction from someone who is not their parent if their parent will not allow anyone else to speak to them? And what kind of person does a child grow into if nobody except their parent is allowed to correct their bad behavior? Anyway, thank you for watching.